Welcome to Pete's Property Podcast, brought to you by Buyers and hosted by Pete Wargent, buyer's agent, finance and real estate expert, and all-round property guru, plus published author. Join Pete for 30 minutes as he chats all things property with a new guest each week. Learn practical tips from the movers and shakers in the property industry and well-known personalities sharing their property journeys.
G'day, welcome to this week's episode of the Pete Wargent Property Pod. I'm delighted today to have a special guest on the podcast, John McCann from PSP Property Group. John, welcome. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for the invite, mate.
All good. So did you have a morning bay swim in Melbourne today?
Yeah, mate. So I got into the bay this morning. It was a balmy 11 degrees. So I did a bit of a workout and then jumped in the ocean and we're trying to stay in there for 10 minutes, which is always really, really hard.
You're a braver man than me. I was down in Melbourne yesterday. It was 8 with a high of 14. So bracing start to the day. So tell us a bit about your background and your career, because I think you were at one stage a journalist back in the day, but tell us a bit about how you got into real estate. Going
back, I guess I got into physics. So started a physics course at university. Got through the first year and realised that I'd probably have to spend the next 5 or 6 years sort of studying before I'd actually make any money out of it. And then went for a job at News Limited and started in sales and then worked into like a pre-press role where our little department sort of worked under the managing director, and we printed the newspaper digitally sort of every day and looked for problems. And I guess probably after about 10 years, realised that there was a computer program that did our job probably more successfully than what we were doing it. Tested that and basically made myself redundant. But having said that, I think in the late 90s, working in the newspaper industry, it was, in the heyday of the newspapers, it was, they had heaps of disposable income. There was lots of advertising revenue coming through, and it was just a fantastic place to work. I remember going for the interview, sitting down and just thinking, geez, I just want to work in this building. It's just fabulous.
And that was down in Melbourne as well?
Yeah, so that was at the Herald and Weekly Times. So we produced, the Herald Sun obviously daily, and then the Weekly Times on a weekly basis, and a couple of magazines we did as well there. And it was great. It was a great experience. I thoroughly enjoyed working there, to be honest. And it was, I think the writing was on the wall in terms of advertising revenue was dropping. Potentially, they weren't really embracing that new internet thing. And, after the technology sort of made our department redundant, I'd had exposure, I guess, to the real estate market through my dad. He was one of the 10-pound poms that came out. So him and mum came out when they were 19. They were both from Manchester. So not too far, I guess, from where you grew up.
Yeah, not a million miles away, although everything's pretty close in England. It's not a very big place. That's
it. So they came over here, grew up on a little farm out in a place called Malmesbury, which is halfway between Bendigo and Melbourne. Basically, Dad was a builder, and then sort of got into, again, another similarity. He was a prison officer as well for a little while, and they bought a small business closer to Melbourne. That didn't go so well, sort of went tits up. And then we ended up selling the farm, sort of moved into town. And I think Dad was, 45, had $200 in the bank, and then just got introduced into property and managed to buy, I think the property market was going pretty well there, managed to buy 2 or 3 properties and built equity really quite quick and really got involved in property there and got, sort of got himself out of trouble and became reasonably affluent out of property. He actually so my first entrance into the market was he started a small investment company where there was 10 people. We were all putting in, $50 a week. And the idea was after 10 years, we'd all own a house. I was studying at the time, so I think I got about 6 months into that when I'd missed a few payments, so I got asked to leave the group. So he didn't quite cover me for that. Then I guess as soon as I started working for the newspaper and getting an income, I bought my first house at 20. Again, built equity really quite fast in that somehow, and then bought another house when I was sort of 22, but committed the cardinal sin and used it like an ATM machine. And real estate dollars, I worked out that the way to avoid compounding interest is to take the money out and spend it on things like motorbikes and boats and that sort of stuff.
It's easily done when you're younger, I guess. And I remember the old adverts, the equity mate.
Equity mate.
I guess particularly when you're a young guy, it's difficult to avoid. And I guess so these days you've ended up at the PSP Property Group. Tell us a bit about what you guys do there.
So PSP Property Group, we sell development sites, large farms. We really sort of operate in that greenfield market just on the edges of metropolitan Melbourne. We've got a team, in the southeast, in the north, west. We've really been very successful in terms of the amount of sales we've made. I think we've made just over $3 billion worth of sales since its inception. Now we're sort of finding that we've sort of pivoted a little bit in that the relationships that we've made with the developers, we're now doing project marketing as well. So that's really gone very well. And the last, obviously, couple of years has been excellent in that market. We sort of sell, 500 to 700 lots a year. We offer, I guess, our services are more targeted to the smaller developers. I've been saying that, we've got a site at the moment with, 610 lots that's going really, really well.
Do you want to save on buyer's agent fees? You could save thousands with Buyers Buyers. As Australia's most extensive network of buyer's agents, we can lock in highly competitive prices. Plus, our national network of buyer's agents are some of the best in the business. So get the Buyers Buyers advantage and talk to us today. Call 1-800-975-051 or visit buyersbuyers.com.au.
I guess the reason I wanted to get you on and have some expertise in the area was because, I guess the past couple of years there was initial uncertainty in 2020. Then the government put in place the home builder stimulus, and then I guess the vaccines came along and everything came roaring back. But I guess, more recently we've been reading about increases in the price of steel and timber and shortages of materials, and then something of a land supply shortage as well, simply because the demand was so strong for a period of time there. So tell us a bit about what you're seeing in the market. Is there a bit of a bottleneck of in the supply of land for Metro and outer Melbourne?
Well, I mean, specifically, I think if you head out to the southeast of Melbourne, there's definitely a lack of land, a lack of zoned land available to buy. There's a lack of land that's coming up that will be zoned as well. So the urban growth zone, there is a real land shortage out in the southeast, definitely. Out in the north and the west, which is where we operate a lot, I think there's still, thousands of hectares that are within the urban growth zone that are yet to be developed. And I think the biggest bottleneck in terms of that is the infrastructure, and land that's designated, to be developed just doesn't have the service, or it's not serviceable in those areas. Can't speak a lot on the cost of the development. Look, it's certainly gone up like anything. There's shortages of staff, there's shortages throughout the industry. There's the staff shortages are really making it hard. Anecdotally, I've heard, in some of the water authorities that some of the main planners that give approval on these development sites have left, and that there's, junior planners looking after it, running around and are making life very, very difficult. About 12 years ago, the MPA, which is the Melbourne Planning Authority, drew a line all the way around Melbourne and said, okay, this is the urban growth zone. We don't want to sprawl out after this zone. And then they started breaking up each of the areas within that zone and called them PSPs, or precinct structure plans. Those structure plans basically go through a whole, they, point out where the schools are, where the shopping centres are. If it's medium density or normal density housing, there's, a park within 400 metres of every house in these zones. It's really a strategic plan of an area before it goes to development. The Toowoomba PSP was probably one of the first ones which was gazetted, or which was approved, and that was in the Melton City Council. That was 12 years ago. And to give you an idea, the there's an area in that called the Imaru Circuit drainage scheme, which is, obviously the outfall of the water has to go somewhere, and that drainage scheme, 10 years on or 12 years on, still doesn't have a long-term drainage solution for. There's about 11,000 homes that are ready to be developed. They're all ready to go, and they're not, because there's no water authority that's really taken responsibility and said, okay, we'll publicly acquire some land, very close to it so we can outfall into a creek. It's just it's added all these extra costs to the development. So each and every estate has to have a temporary drainage solution there, which obviously adds cost to the developer, adds cost to the end product.
I guess that's always the challenge, isn't it? When there's new land released, it's one thing releasing the land, but if there's no infrastructure there and there's no schools or service stations or connecting roads and things like that, then it's difficult to make the location attractive, at least initially.
Yeah.
So I guess the really interesting thing to me is we had the borders effectively shut for a couple of years, and I was even stuck overseas for a period of time. And intuitively, people was thinking, well, like the demand for housing with no population growth there's plenty of building going on. There's going to be sort of an oversupply, and yet for various reasons that just hasn't happened. So, are you still seeing the demand for new housing as still being very strong?
Look, I think it definitely is. I think that last interest rate rise did make a dent in people's thoughts of the market, in that we've certainly seen a slowdown. So across the board, we've seen probably about 30 or 40% drop in terms of inquiries. At the moment, we're actually in between stages on all of our products. We've got one product out in Deanside, which is coming to the end of the estate. That's still chugging on quite nicely. But in terms of the active estates that we've got going now, we've seen just the inquiry rate drop. There's probably one estate that's still doing really, really well. That's in a really good spot. It probably aims more towards an owner-occupier rather than an investor, and that one's still getting good inquiry. But I think overall it's certainly slowed down. But anecdotally, we speak to builders, and the ones that have prepared themselves and had these cost escalations under control, I think they're still doing really well.
Yeah, and have you seen the price of land increase over the past couple of years in general?
Oh, absolutely, astronomically. Yeah, and every time a price increase happened, the market took it, pretty easily. I mean, we thought once that $26,000 home builder grant ended, we thought we'd see a dramatic drop off in sales, but it was like it had gathered its own momentum, and it just, it just didn't stop. It just didn't stop. I think, as I said, at the moment, inquiry rates are certainly down, and I think everybody's maybe holding their breath to wait and see what happens. How high does the interest rate go? But yeah, there's still pent-up demand out there, and I think as soon as we get to a level playing field or an even keel on the interest rates, open up immigration, all the factors are there for the market to take off again. I think because everybody's got a job who wants to work. It's still somewhat affordable. And if we can get back to those 5% interest rates, I think that's what's been factored in for most people. I don't think we'll see a whole lot of mortgagees in possessions or anything like that. I'm pretty confident with the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I think back to the really tough recessions, which, is decades ago for Australia, but it was really when people, if they lost their jobs, then that could make it difficult. But with mortgage rates, it's sort of moving back towards 5% and everybody has a job who wants one. It's not quite the same dynamic. It's interesting on the land prices that you mentioned there. I was reading the other day up here on the Sunshine Coast that the median price for a block of land now is over $800,000. And, you think that the price of housing would have to cool at some point. But if it's $800,000 just for a block, you wonder. And there is no land. You try and buy a block around here, there's just nothing. Yeah. So there's a lot of upwards pressure. Interesting you mentioned there on the population trends, because for a decade there, Melbourne in particular was growing at a frantic pace. It's over 100,000 a year and 150,000 in Victoria. obviously that's calmed down a bit, and I think a few people ducked off interstate during the COVID period. But are you starting to see any sort of signs of people coming back, or I guess maybe it's more going to be driven by immigration again going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, traditionally, I think there's a lot of people. There's an exodus, obviously, of Victoria to go up to warmer climates, and then I guess you see, and a lot of my friends have done it. They've all gone interstate, and then over time, the routes bring them back somewhere.
And the AFL, I guess. Yeah, there's not much football up here.
That's it. I've been to see a few games out at the Gold Coast as well. It's good fun. It's interesting there.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as the MCG on a Friday night. Full house. It's a slightly different atmosphere, but and are there any particular growth areas you're expecting to see in Melbourne over the next decade?
I think some of the regional towns will keep the renaissance that they've had. I think that the regional towns with, some sort of natural beauty that they have, so towns like Warrnambool and up into Chuka and Torquay and those sort of Surf Coast Shire and all that, I think that they will go up and up. I think probably for the next 10 years they'll have continued growth because, look, in my view, and again, I could be absolutely wrong, but I think the pendulum shift of people leaving the city, I think that will come back. Just, anecdotally, there seems to be more people in the city now than there was last month, and there was certainly more people last month than there was the month before. Yeah, so certainly some regional towns will go well. From what I'm seeing out in the in the greenfields or the outer metropolitan, those places are still just booming. There's obviously all the kids are sort of growing up and buying their first home and people living in the same area. I guess I see Melbourne just continued growth for quite some time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was down in Melbourne, as I mentioned, for a couple of days, and I had a meeting with a guy from Geelong actually yesterday, but he'd moved into the Melbourne CBD, so it's still a lot cheaper over the last couple of years, and the commute was killing him. Yeah, I think it's certainly in the evenings, Melbourne seems to be pumping with people, but maybe during the day, still some people working from home or maybe doing 3 or 4 days in the office instead of the traditional 5. So there's clearly been some kind of a change, and I don't know whether that will persist or whether there might be something of a hybrid model going forward. Obviously, for a lot of people,
I think that's exactly what will happen. I think. Sorry, you had a guest on. Was it Andrew Kay? No. Sorry, Simon Kutzenmacher.
Your German pronunciation is better than mine.
Well, I think his sum up of it was absolutely correct in that, you'll see the city fill back up over the next 5 years. And again, I know the PR company that we use, I know they're down the Surfshire, and then, they have an apartment in the city as well. So I think that with the apartment prices being as low as they are at the moment, I think that's, another option for people who are, maybe thinking about having, a city pad and a not so city pad.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the units there, because one of the big shifts through the COVID pandemic was people wanted more space. And I guess you would have seen that directly at PSP, people looking for, I guess, detached houses and blocks of land that are maybe away from the CBD. But some of those inner city units have got quite a bit cheaper. Did you see anything in terms of buyer preference over the past couple of years? Any sort of changes in taste or property types that they've been looking at?
There's not necessarily a shift, but between the investor and the owner-occupier, I think, and again, anecdotally so I did residential sales sort of before I worked at PSP, and there was certainly a shift towards, single-parent families, maybe rather than buying that 600 square metre block, with a big backyard, certainly really only interested in something, around the 300 square metres with, a really nice house, a bit of an entertaining area outside, but no backyard as such. The land that's available seems to be sort of heading towards that way. I think a lot of the estates we have now, average size is, around that 350 square metres. That seems to be the sweet spot in terms of the size that people are looking for in those sort of outer metropolitan areas. The smaller lots, the townhouse sites, they're selling pretty well, mainly being taken up by investors. But those 350 square metre sites, there's certainly, we can't get enough of that size.
I think so. A lot of people quite like the idea of low maintenance these days. And I think some people want enough space for a home office potentially, but not that keen on doing the gardening sometimes. John, one of the things I've read a little bit about in the media is that there's been some high profile cases of developers getting themselves into cash flow issues, I assume because they've got fixed price contracts and then the price of materials and tradies went up, and it's put some of the developers under pressure. Is there any have you had any insights into what's been happening there?
Yeah, look, the last thing a developer will tell you is that they're in trouble. But I think anecdotally, again, is that those added costs, and I'll go back to that, that thing of that Imaru drainage scheme. We've got a development in there that was half sold and it was ready to go, and it's just hit this hurdle of the water authority not planning or not having plans in place, and this has added maybe 2 years to the project, and again that brings those margins pretty close to them either making a profit or not making a profit. I've got another developer who's had a change in their cultural heritage management, and basically which has required them to go back to the drawing board just before they've got their permit, go back to the drawing board, do another cultural heritage management plan, which adds 5 or 6 months to them getting to the market. And 5 months ago the market was absolutely flying. In a couple of months' time, when these guys do go to market, it's questionable what the market is going to look like when they come to it. So I think it's absolutely affecting them. I think developers probably look more on that longer sort of term. So they're maybe not as exposed as builders would be, but certainly affected.
Yeah, and I suppose another thing I'm interested just to get your insights on being based down in Melbourne. It seemed for a while there was a lot of empty units in the city, but then suddenly everything's filling up again, and you get away from the CBD and there's just nothing for rent. Is that having an impact in the kind of areas you guys operate in? There seems to be a massive shortage of available rental properties.
Well, and again, it's probably not something that we're really exposed to. But obviously, I think there will be a big increase in rents coming up. Obviously, once the interest rates go up, people who have bought investment properties, will need to increase. Their costs have gone up, so they'll need to increase their income. So I think, and again, once that interest rate stabilises, I believe people will be able to make that investment choice. And it seems, again, we're in St Kilda Road in Melbourne, and it seems like most of the apartments are full again, as you said. In terms of the investors, I think maybe they're holding back just to see, if they're either in the market now, but in terms of new investors, they've certainly dropped off. But I think they'll come back once the interest rates level out. Yeah,
sentiment stabilises a bit. I think at the moment people are just hanging back to see how things play out for a few months on the interest rate rises. And as you mentioned, the cost of a lot of stuff's been going up, a fair bit of inflation around. Have you got any advice for a first home buyer looking to pull the trigger on a first purchase, maybe buying a block or buying something to live in as a first step?
So I guess I was always told it's really the time in the market, not the timing of the market. Just the market's not going to drop. I wouldn't have thought, depending on, obviously that's specific to certain areas, but I would have thought just get in when you can. If you're already qualified for finance, I would go and buy something now before the interest rates change, and maybe you're not qualified in 3 or 4 months' time. So maybe go out and buy something now. And then I guess the other thing I was always taught was the BAM principle, which is buy right, add value, and then manage intensively. So if you can find something maybe a little bit under sort of valued out there in the marketplace, which again, anecdotally, I think auction clearance rates have dropped a little bit. Maybe go in and make a cheeky offer on some properties. But that certainly being able to add value onto a property, create some equity, and then then you're miles in front. You've set a little bit of a buffer for yourself if interest rates do go up too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the first time in probably a decade, we're actually seeing wages go up. So even if we do get a rate hike or two, at least with full employment, there's good job opportunities and prospects for a raise or a promotion. So, John, if people want to find out a bit more about PSP Group and what they do, where should they go for more?
So either hit me up on LinkedIn, John McCann, or they could go to psp.propertygroup.com.au.
Brilliant. That's excellent. So, John, thanks so much for giving us your insights into what's going on at the pointy end, especially down in Melbourne and Victoria. So look forward to seeing how things play out over the rest of the year. Any tips for the AFL this year?
Oh, mate, I support Essendon, so we're building this year.
It's a rebuilding.
Rebuild this year. Next year.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks so much, John, and speak to you again soon.
No worries. Thanks, Pete.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Pete's Property Podcast, powered by Buyers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as Pete chats all things property with a new guest. And just a reminder that the information provided in this podcast is general advice only and doesn't take into account your personal financial situation or needs. You should always consult a licensed professional to discuss your individual personal circumstances.